Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give everyone a chance to come into the room. We're just getting ourselves started here. So glad you're taking time to join us today. We really appreciate that you've joined our webinar. My name is Tracy Crow, and you're here for the webinar on transforming teaching through curriculum-based professional learning. As you enter, we love it when you share your name, role, and location in the chat box as we all get settled in and get ready to hear from our panelists and learn together today. Today's webinar continues Learning Forward series to support educators through an ever-changing teaching and learning environment. In every webinar we hold, the power of community and of practitioner voice is an inspiration. And we really value your questions and ideas and engagement in the chat box at any time. And just as a reminder, and we'll share this a couple times today during our webinar, everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email with a recording of this video and a link to the summary of the chat box with links to the resources that you all share and that our panelists share. So on your chat, just to make sure that we all see your comments, please share. The default on the chat will say to panelists. Make sure you share with all attendees and panelists so we can see your questions and ideas. With our guest today, we're going to dive deep into what shape curriculum-based professional learning takes when it has an impact on educator practice and student results. Learning Forward is proud that we had the opportunity to engage early on with the Carnegie Corporation of New York and many partners in the thinking and conversations that led to the work that we'll hear about. This work has really informed our understanding of curriculum-based professional learning, and the timing is magnificent in connection with our revision of standards for professional learning in process now. I'll share that we are really grateful for the collaboration as well as the Carnegie Corporation's financial support of the standards revision process, as well as their support of other initiatives tied to strengthening content and curriculum-based professional learning. Before I introduce our guests, let's do a quick poll. And I'll just let you know that I'm supported here in addition to the panelists that I'll introduce, but Ariel Kane behind the scenes, making sure that our poll questions come up and that sort of thing. And Melinda George will keep an eye on the chat box and answer any questions. So you see the poll question in front of you, and we just want to hear, first of all, what's your primary role in supporting the implementation of curriculum? And you may do all of these as well as the others, but pick the answer that matches your role the best. Do you provide resources or support for professional learning? Do you design or facilitate professional learning? Do you engage in it or other? If you're a combination, love to see the comments in the chat box. And then the second question is, to what degree is the curriculum-based professional learning you lead or experience sustained over the course of implementation rather than only when new curriculum is launched? So please select your answers there, and we'll take a few seconds to see those responses come in. And I know we have a range of roles represented here. Good to see you all coming from all over the place and learning with us today. So Ariel, whenever we have those responses, we'll take a look. Okay, so there we see the results. And a huge chunk of you, 60%, answer designing and or facilitating professional learning. You're so much in the right spot. Thank you to those who provide resources or support for professional learning. And then I know some of you are primarily learners, and then some of you play a variety of roles. On the second question, interesting again to see that 60% mark on to what degree is the curriculum-based professional learning sustained over the course of implementation. So I'm seeing a lot of folks answering somewhat and 33% saying quite a bit, which is also great. So we have a lot more to share on this. Thank you so much for those responses. All right, now I'm going to introduce our panelists. Jim Short comes to us from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, where he's the program director for leadership and teaching to advance learning. Jim has been immersed in science education and curriculum for many years since his time as a secondary science teacher and also as a district science coordinator for Denver Public Schools. Stephanie Hirsch is also with us today. She is Learning Forward's former executive director, and she worked with Jim on the work we're going to hear about. Stephanie retired from Learning Forward not too long ago after 31 years with the organization. And I'll just share that not only is she one of the field's foremost experts on professional learning, but she's also a master collaborator. Jim, congratulations on being one of her many co-authors, an honor that I am certainly proud to have experienced. Kalonda Colson-McDonald also joins us today. She is a grades K-8 science training and support coordinator at the district level, and she's working with teachers in Michigan to field test open SciEd resources. She is working to spread to teachers her own passion for ensuring students have authentic science learning experiences that engage them with real-world phenomena. And we'll also hear from Catherine McNeil, professor of education at Boston College. She's a former middle school science teacher, and her research focuses on how to support students with diverse backgrounds in engaging in science practices in their learning and supporting educators in the use of open SciEd resources, where she helps to lead the development of the open SciEd professional learning curriculum. We will have time for Q&A with our panelists today, so please keep your questions and ideas coming in the chat box. And I'm going to hand it over to Jim to kick us off.
Thanks, Tracy. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today to talk about curriculum-based professional learning. As Tracy mentioned, Learning Forward is in the process of revising the standards for professional learning, which we hope will influence both the policies and the practices that guide all professional learning for educators. The elements for curriculum-based professional learning are very consistent and aligned with these new standards. The elements focus on the design features for professional learning when the goal is to support teachers implementing new instructional materials. While there are other goals for professional learning, our focus today is on the implementation of high quality instructional materials supported with curriculum-based professional learning. The goal of a Carnegie Corporation challenge paper is to lift up ideas and issues in a way that will influence the field and the nation's agenda. You can read here the goal for the challenge paper. The subjects and questions that we explore and the issues we frame grow out of our grant-making work. The focus of the leadership and teaching portfolio that I manage at the corporation focuses on our investments in the implementation of high-quality instructional materials and curriculum-based professional learning in ELA, math, and science. But let's first review some of the research about why this topic's important. As we're all aware, research shows using better instructional materials improves student outcomes just as much as having a better teacher at the front of the classroom. But deepening teachers' content knowledge is not enough. The amount or dosage of professional learning also makes a difference, which means that the launch of a new curriculum in a district needs to be more than a summer institute. When the curriculum a teacher is using is the focus of the professional learning, we can see significant improvement in student outcomes, which is about the same effect as when we focus on improving the quality of teaching through learning new teaching strategies or reducing the class size, but much more affordable. So the implications are clear. Curriculum matters, but how teachers use curriculum matters even more. So what did we do? First, we conducted an in-depth review of the research based on effective professional learning and the importance of high-quality instructional materials. Then in the fall of 2019, we convened a group of our grantees made up of leading curriculum developers, organizations that support teaching and learning, and their school district partners. Over 2 days and later in more than 24 follow-up interviews, we asked questions, listened closely, and learned. We learned about the specific challenges they face, what logistical hurdles were the toughest to overcome, what worked and what tactics helped reset expectations for what students and teachers could do. How did support from outsiders help build a stable base for change? And what learning experiences did teachers value most? So how do we make professional learning work better for teachers and their students? It's really a simple concept. Teachers experience the same kind of inquiry-based learning we expect them to provide for their students. Whether it's ELA, math, or science, students take ownership of their learning by solving problems, making meaning from text, and investigating phenomena. Teachers deserve the same opportunities to learn new ways of teaching that support this new type of learning. It's a simple concept, but it's not simple to implement. We think teachers deserve the highest quality professional learning to support the implementation of new instructional materials and curriculum. In the report, we identify a core set of actions, approaches, and enabling conditions that affect schools and systems need to have in place to reinforce and amplify the power of high quality curriculum and skillful teaching. The elements of curriculum-based professional learning, or simply the elements, provide essential guidance for transforming teaching and student learning. Before I provide an overview of the 10 elements and the 3 essentials for curriculum-based professional learning, let's first hear about what this work looks like in a school district engaged in implementing a new curriculum and support they provided their teachers. Brian Kingsley is the Chief Academic Officer in CharlotteMecklenburg Schools and leading the implementation of EL Education's K-8 language arts curriculum. As he talks about their work, listen and take notes on the key features of their curriculum implementation and professional learning efforts. He begins by talking about the expectations of teachers and how the district leadership responded.
They were deeply appreciative that we helped them internalize the content, but also began building a bridge of how that informs instructional practice. Early on, we only talked about internalizing the content because the investment was just so large, but they were craving for the how. They wanted to know how this was going to help solve, create equity, help children succeed, how they were going to, it also helped them kind of walk away from practices that no longer serve them. And what I mean by that is like the consistent use prior of like leveled readers. Like it helped them kind of get a piece of how to scaffold complex text, how to ensure that people, like it helped them challenge their own beliefs around what kids can do. I think that was an essential takeaway and component. It also helped inform us too into, as we move into next year, that one model and one track of professional learning is not a one size fits all in terms of learners, right? Like we need, and like we're learning that now in a remote stance, like how do we provide multiple opportunities for people to internalize and approach and process this in various ways? And how do we tweak like the formats, the modalities, empower people differently? So it's not just central office or people from EL. I think those were really, really important things. And I also think it helped, you know, and I'd like to say this was by design. Some of it was, but I think I'm happy that it came out this way. It began to build an enthusiasm in the schools for those who were not yet implementing, right? Like they saw the pain, they saw the complexity, they saw the district stay the course, evolve based upon how they were, you know, what they were saying. And they began seeing children interact with curriculum and begin to write and express themselves very differently. And to me, that's another PowerPoint of the investment, is that because it's quality has to win at the end of the day, right? Like in quality content, to me, like if children don't begin to change and how they show up in the curriculum, ultimately we don't have a chance of sustaining this kind of change. And I think for teachers who didn't initially come on board, that were not pioneers, or you know, whatever word you want to describe those, sometimes that are kind of early out racing ahead of the group, it's the children that end up changing them in their minds, in my perspective, not just their peers. And you know, I'll say the last thing, you know, key takeaway is our theory of action started with being direct to teacher. People were feeling overwhelmed. Thought leaders wanted to stay ahead. We were responsive to that. But where we've ended in our feedback was that they want to go back to direct to teacher. They want a hybrid of both, which I think is a really huge win. And it forced us to think differently about our professional development calendar so we can free up the time and the space. So we're not pulling people out of classrooms with students and able to free up the time. And there's a study out there that says like a sweet spot for an ROI on professional learning is about 48 to 50 hours of job embedded learning for us to be putting it into practice. So we carved out 8 days of professional learning direct to teacher next year. And that's in addition to those other vehicles for PD that I mentioned, our communities of practice, direct to principal. And so I'm really hopeful, not just for new teachers that are coming on board, but that will continue for teachers that implemented this year. Like that doesn't go away. We're going deeper for teachers in K-3. Like your learning is going to continue.
So now I'd like to use Brian's story of the work in Charlotte-Mecklenburg to kind of provide a quick overview of the elements. The first category are the core design features: curriculum, transformative learning, and equity. Brian talked about the role of high quality curriculum and their decision of why they selected EL Education language arts curriculum for their students. He talked about curriculum building a bridge to inform instructional practice. While their initial professional learning focused on launching the curriculum and introducing new content, he also talked about the need for helping teachers shift their beliefs and transform their teaching practices through ongoing job-embedded professional learning. The role of equity was central to the work Charlotte-Mecklenburg is undertaking. He shared that teachers wanted to know how the new curriculum would create more equitable opportunities for student learning. He mentioned how the curriculum could help teachers scaffold complex texts to ensure more equitable instruction and also help challenge teachers' beliefs about what students could do. Another category are the structural design features of curriculum-based professional learning. Brian talked about the need for different models of professional learning as they move beyond the initial launch. He said that one model is not one size fits all in order to meet the needs of teachers. He also talked more about the need to recraft their professional learning time to provide more in-depth and ongoing opportunities to work together through collective participation focused on implementing the curriculum and the impact it is having on their students. He mentioned they changed their professional learning calendar to include 8 days of learning for teachers throughout the year, as well as continuing their communities of practice and support to principals to learn about the new curriculum. And then there's the functional design features. How does it actually work? As already mentioned, Brian talked about the need to shift teachers' beliefs about what's possible for students and how to use new curriculum to meet that challenge. He also talked about this shift in beliefs happened after students experienced the curriculum and responded in ways that showed teachers it was working for their students. So the sequence of change Brian was talking about was first helping teachers learn to change their practice, which then led to changes in how students were learning, and then that led to teachers changing their beliefs. He even talked about the role the students played to help teachers make these shifts in their teaching and changes in their beliefs about learning. In terms of reflection and feedback, Brian talked about the role of student impact on outcomes and how the district used evidence to inform interventions and support teachers over time with the implementation of new instructional materials. Several times, Brian talked about the importance of change management. When teachers were feeling overwhelmed, leaders in the district needed to be responsive and think differently about what professional learning support looked like. When teachers saw students respond differently to using new instruction materials and expressing themselves differently, teachers were more interested in interacting with the curriculum differently themselves. He also commented on how the early implementers of the curriculum began to build enthusiasm in schools for those not yet implementing the new instructional materials, which helped bring others on board wanting to learn about the curriculum. And then finally, the essentials or the enabling conditions for curriculum-based professional learning. Brian talked about the role that teacher leaders played in helping to roll out the implementation of the new instructional materials beyond the initial pilot phase. He shared how school and district leaders listened and worked with teachers to help address their concerns so they would take more ownership in using the new instructional materials. And he talked about some of the enabling conditions that supported curriculum implementation, including the large investment the district made both in purchasing the curriculum materials as well as partnering with EL Education and providing more time for curriculum-based professional learning to support teachers and school leaders. So that's an overview of the elements and essentials and how they work together to support curriculum-based professional learning. The elements and the essentials represent what we know and what we care about in high-quality professional learning to support curriculum implementation. It's what compels me, and I hope it does you too. But this is not an easy thing to do. It requires the ability to integrate the elements in ways that go beyond what most schools and systems are currently doing to support teachers with using new curriculum materials. Taken together, the elements and the essentials offer a foundation for practitioners looking to undertake this work. They also serve as a call to action. By reshaping current practices with the elements and essentials as a guide, we can help teachers develop the skills, knowledge, and understandings they need to set all students up for success. So now we'd like to go a little deeper into the functional design features of curriculum-based professional learning. Specifically, the learning designs element and how it works to surface teachers' beliefs and provide them opportunities to experience the same kind of learning we expect them to provide their students. Stephanie Hirsch is going to have a conversation with Kalonda McDonald and Kate McNeil about the learning designs used in helping science teachers learn to use the Open SciEd instructional materials, a new middle school curriculum designed for the next generation science standards.
Looking forward to the conversation. We have two phenomenal panelists, and they can attest to the fact that great curriculum-based professional learning is easier said than done. They're participating in the national rollout of Open SciEd, a newly released OER middle grade science curriculum designed for next generation science standards. And they make the work look really easy. But today we're going to invite them to pull back the curtain and let the rest of us get a better understanding of what's involved in ensuring that educators experience the professional learning that is advocated by the elements. So, Kalonda, let me start with you. In the paper, we say teachers must experience the same kind of inquiry learning we expect them to create for their students. And could you describe what that looks like in your role first as a participant in the Open SciEd national training?
Wow, thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. That's an amazing question. And I'd have to be sincerely honest to say when I started the work, I felt challenged and it was challenging. But as I embraced the process of the Open SciEd professional learning experience, I'd like to say that now I'm encouraged, invigorated. I'm excited again about science education. So I'm extremely thankful for that. I knew early on when my first experience with Open SciEd a couple of summers ago with the Michigan Math and Science Center Network, I knew that the science teaching and learning was actually shifting. And with those shifts, I needed to get up to the bandwagon and make certain that I was definitely able to support my students and my teachers in my district. And one of the awesome things about Open SciEd is when you're going through the professional learning experience, we experience something called Student Hat. And in Student Hat, we are able to channel our middle school energy. We're able to sit with students and figure out, hey, what might a student say? What might they say here? What might this experience look like? And as a teacher, being able to undergo something called the anchoring phenomena routine, where our instructors actually coached us through, we were able to experience the anchoring phenomena. In science, it's called phenomena. In ELA, it could be something similar to engaging with a new text, or in mathematics, engaging with a new mathematical problem, or with social studies, engaging in essential questions. But during this routine, we were actually able to go through as middle school learners to anticipate key things that we actually might see. I think that I'm a firm believer that living that experience was helpful in PD, because in order to transform my learning and my instruction and my impact, I needed to be intentional about my practice. And I think that going through the Open SIAD experience helped me to do exactly that.
So Kate, the opening experience sounds incredible. You can tell from Kalanda's enthusiasm about that and what she began to share about what she took away. Can you tell us a bit about how that is structured and what you're trying to accomplish with these opening activities?
So just to build off of everything Kalana just said, you know, the shifts in science can feel very different for teachers, right? In the past, they might have started a unit by saying, we're starting a unit on thermal energy or metabolic reactions, and we're changing that. So instead, a unit for students starts with a phenomena, and we're asking these middle school students, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What questions do you have? What do you want to figure out? And those questions and ideas from the students can really drive where we go in the curriculum and still enable kids to develop really rich concepts. So this shift can be challenging for teachers. It can feel intimidating. And that's one of the reasons that we start with this idea of student hat that Kalanda talked about, that we really want to immerse teachers in the experience, because they might have never experienced science like this when they were kids. They might have never taught science like this before. So actually putting on that student hat, trying to think of a 13-year-old they've taught in the past and really kind of channel that energy can help them develop an understanding of the curricular approach. It can help them develop a stronger understanding of the science content. And I think it can really help them better understand their students. So when their kids are going through this, it'll be new for their kids too. So what might their students be feeling? What might they say? What might they be thinking? So we use that student hat to really try to shift teachers' experience in terms of what science can look like.
And I can imagine the concept of using the student hat isn't just for science. I mean, it's necessary in any new curriculum and any new material that any of us are asked to learn. So Kate, tell me a little bit about how you transition the participant from the student hat to the teacher hat.
Yep. So when we start with that initial activities, the initial anchoring phenomena, after we go through it in student hat, we then pop out and say, now we're in teacher hat. So now think of yourself as a middle school science teacher. Let's reflect a little bit on that experience. So what did you do? What do you feel like in terms of how that would help your students figure something out? How might that help support a classroom culture where all students have access? So we try to pop up and really reflect on the implications for their own classroom, so they can think about what it might look like with their students, so they can talk to their peers. All of this is a reflective experience with their colleagues. And I very much believe that, you know, teachers learn as much from each other and their peers as they are from the facilitator. So when I'm facilitating, I'm trying to create this space where they can think and talk to each other in order to enable them to think about these general strategies that they can then apply back to their classroom.
So Kalanda, now you've left, excuse me, you've left the Open SIAD National Facilitator Training and you're back in Michigan and you're working with teachers. So what do you hear from the teachers as they reflect on this kind of learning experience? And how does what you learn inform your work going forward?
Yes, Kate talked about that whole teacher hat. And one of the things that we hear on behalf of the Michigan Math and Science Center Network, we're able to work with amazing teachers. So we hear lots and lots of good stuff. But one of the things, ironically, teachers bring out is this idea of being able to go through this professional learning experience where we're looking at it from a student perspective and student hat, but then having that key balance with teacher hat. Because when I'm in teacher hat, I'm able to think about, okay, how do kids learn? Am I building a culture that is going to actually support student learning? And as a teacher in teacher hat, I'm now reflecting on my beliefs about education, myself as an educator, right? What I believe about my students. And so that balance in teacher hat and student hat is definitely key. One of the things we also do in the Open SIAD education professional learning is this idea where we're watching video clips. So we're seeing video clips of students in a classroom. Teachers in Michigan absolutely love it. Why? Because number one, it represents an authentic experience. And now it allows me to see from the perspective, okay, this could potentially happen in my classroom, right? I could potentially see this in my classroom. We're also looking at video clips from professional learning, right? So teachers, we're experts, we know everything. So we come to the room and we know all the science in the world. But when we're being asked and we're being challenged to figure things out as our students will, teachers absolutely love that component as well. And then I think one of the other things that we hear from our Michigan teachers is, I talked about the anchoring phenomena routine. We engage in the phenomena, the text, the mathematical problem. Kids are making connections. They're then using the content to figure things out. But we take teachers through something called an anchoring phenomena routine tracker. And this tracker actually helps teachers to think about, right? So they're kind of giving some internal feedback. They're doing some reflection. How are we doing? How are we doing with supporting students with this culture? How are we doing with supporting students with actually figuring these things out? And I think that tracker serves two roles. I think that it ultimately helps the teacher, but as an Open SIAD facilitator, it helps actually inform our work. So how can we support teachers better? Teachers are filling out this tracker and they're saying, oh, I could do a better job of asking questions, or perhaps I need to pull back on telling students all the answers. So the tracker helps to even inform us as facilitators on, number one, how do we need to plan our next professional learning experience to better support teachers? And where coaching is involved, how can the coach use these as conversation stems to continue the work? Because I think what's important here is that we engage in new curriculum, but teachers must feel supported. If they feel supported, they'll go after it.
Well, you touched on so much there, and so many of the elements that I could like tease out of the answer. That was just great. And Kate, I have actually a two-part question. One is anything that you want to reinforce from what Kalanda just shared. And then two, I think because this is about curriculum-based professional learning, now so far we've been engaging the teacher and experiencing lessons that they'll use with their students, but we really haven't opened up the entire curriculum. So talk to us about that part of the professional learning and how you all think about that, because I know that has some special characteristics that come with it as well.
Okay, that's great. There's a ton of things that Kalanda just said. I'll just touch on one of them. You know, I think one of the things that she alluded to was this idea that it really takes time. So we're engaged in the PD, and then the teachers go try the curriculum, and then they come back to the PD, and then they try another unit. And it's this over time that really supports them in these shifts. So that is one thing that I feel like is really important. In terms of using the teacher edition and how we introduce that, we initially introduced it in the tracker that Kalanda talked about. And Kalanda, I have it printed right next to me because I printed it in order to think about what we're going to talk about today. Is using this tracker as well as other tools that we use. And in doing all that work with the teachers, one of the things we really stress is that the curriculum materials are not prescriptive, right? This is not a script that we want teachers to follow. Rather, it's a tool that we want them to use in order to really elevate the student voices in their classrooms. So when they're looking at the curriculum to think about this tracker, they have that in their head, like, who are my students? How am I going to use this to really support an equitable sense-making culture in my classroom? So for example, one of the things we do is we do this thing called the storyline activity. So we have the teachers build a storyline of the unit. When we're in person, it's on the walls. When we're virtual, it's on a remote space. But when they're doing the storyline activity, different pairs of teachers are looking at different lessons. And as they're looking at these different lessons, they're thinking to themselves, okay, in this lesson, what might my student be wondering about? What questions might they have? What are they learning? What are the next steps? And they do that to have in their head what their students might be thinking, so they can get the arc of this unit over time, right? The whole idea is that students' questions and ideas are driving where we're going. We're really empowering that student voice. So when they're looking at the teacher edition and the materials, they're always looking at it in relation to their kids and their context, and how is it going to make sense there? And it's not going to look identical in every classroom. It shouldn't, because the kids are really at the center of everything.
In Kalanda, I know you touched on this a little, but perhaps at this point it might be good to say more about it. How do teachers respond to this? Because as was mentioned at the very beginning, this is not the way many teachers were actually prepared to teach. And it can be kind of nerve-wracking. So what's your experience with your teachers in Michigan?
Absolutely. No one size fits all model, right? And I talked about open SciEd education, that first professional learning experience. It challenged me and it was challenging. So there you have it. Teachers feel a little nervous, a little uneasy. Will this work? Um, I'm not sure about the new shifts in science education. What's going to happen? Can I front load vocabulary? So all sorts of things are coming to play. And then you might feel like you need to show up and actually have all the answers. But again, with those responses, I think the model by which we are engaging students and teachers, because ultimately the impact is about students as well. So I'd like to say we're engaging students as we're engaging teachers. So I think that, simply put, teachers are absolutely nervous. Jim talked about it in his quote earlier, that curriculum matters, right? But how we use the curriculum is extremely, extremely important. And so I think that when I show up initially at the training and I'm feeling nervous or I'm challenged or I'm uncomfortable, I think that when you experience, so I think that the experience that's provided during the training builds confidence. Again, we're watching video clips, and I like to think that there's some silent whispers that are coming from the screen telling teachers, you can do this in your classroom, go back and try it. So I think the way that the learning is intentionally designed, we are actually addressing all of the challenges, or not all of them, but enough to make teachers come back for more. And as we take them through the experience, they're becoming more comfortable with utilizing and putting themselves out there, because education is about putting ourselves out there to kids if we're going to build relationship, make the impact, reflect, and challenge our beliefs. So I think nervous, but the way we plan the learning, I think that we're planning it in such a way to support teachers. Teachers are simply saying, I remember I was elbow partners with the teacher a couple summers ago, and we were both nervous, and she ended up saying, I don't think I can do this. And so after several rounds of professional learning with Open SciEd, she's saying, oh, wow, I'm amazed not only at what her students are doing, but what I'm doing as a teacher. And so for her to say that, that evidence statement alone just let me know that I didn't just drink the Kool-Aid, but that this actually works, right? And so that this works with teachers if we are intentional about practicing and offering experiences to teachers, we can transform learning in our classrooms.
And, I want to reinforce that idea that the design is intentional. The every detail that you all have talked about has been thoughtfully developed by a team of educators who understand adult learning, understand student learning, understand the standards, and they think about it in terms of a sequence. And and the great thing is that I know they've been putting it in the chat box, is that people can go watch some of these professional learning designs. They can see the materials, even if they're not science teachers. They can, the order and the structure in which this program in which the professional learning is designed and facilitated can be helpful to anybody in any field. Kalanda, you just kind of touched on one thing that I think it surfaced in the chat box, and I know we're going to be there in just a minute with other questions. But the last thing people always kind of ask about professional learning is, teachers come to these things with certain beliefs about how to teach and what their students are capable of. And I can imagine some of the things you ask them to do challenges those beliefs. And really, it's a question for both of you. We'll start with you, Kalanda. So what do you see that happens with teachers' beliefs over time? And how do you address, the way teachers show up for some of the training?
I think it's important, number one, that I walk into the room, or as facilitators, we walk into the room with the understanding that this is challenging work, right? So I come in with this idea of empathy, right, at heart and at skill. And so that's automatically the approach. I think once we're into the room and we engage, student hat, we quoted in one of our colleagues quoted in the paper, student hat can be a little bit corny, right? So we're aware of all of those things, that are written out there about professional learning, about learning in general. And so I think consciously being aware as a professional learner, right? Facilitator and a learner, and coming into that actual room, being aware of that with teachers and not responding to every body language or but we engage them in the process. So I think sometimes it's proximity control. So as you're knowing your audience, you have a little fun with it. And when we're doing science circles and we're doing a math ELA circle talk, whatever, but we're communicating and we're doing those things with teachers. And so sometimes we can best change the atmosphere and the culture by engaging them deeper in the work. So it's not that we're not cognizant of some of the beliefs that teachers bring in, but we choose to challenge those beliefs again by taking them through the process as a student. And just simply what I have to remind myself, it is a joy and a privilege to educate children. And sometimes we may throw out a reflective question. Our kids can do this. And so as teachers are reflecting through video usage, whether they're looking at student clips from a classroom, that speaks for itself. I don't need to argue that point. If you show up with the heart and you're in education for the right reason, the model speaks for itself. And I think that teachers automatically put their guard down. And again, my first question, I was nervous, but I keep using that word nervous, but I had to embrace the process. And as I embrace the process and engage in the experience, it speaks for itself. So no tricks, just show up and we'll show you.
And Kate, do you want to add anything to that before we go to the many questions that are surfacing in the chat box? Because
I just want to echo and elevate everything that Kalanda said, right? I really think it can be a disruptive experience for teachers. It's new. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and acknowledge that, for myself as a designer, as someone who's going out in classrooms and seeing this, it's new to me too. And we're working on it together. Just like in your classroom with kids, we're figuring it out. When we're in the PD with teachers, we are all figuring this out together. And having that vulnerability and the trust, and I am privileged to work with amazing teachers. So making sure that we all feel that as we're engaged in this work is so important. And just a similar story to one that Kalanda shared, when I think about the first intro PD that we did here in Massachusetts, there was a teacher who was really uncomfortable and raised all these concerns like, I don't think my kids can do this. I don't think they're going to come up with these questions. They don't have enough background knowledge. We need to pre-teach all these things first. And the facilitator kind of tossed it out to the group, and the other teachers in the room were like, I think maybe they can do it. Let's give it a chance. We saw it in that video with Gretchen. We're doing it here together. And that same teacher, we just did our 6th PD with her at the beginning of this week. So we've been working with this teacher for 3 years. She is now the biggest advocate, right? She is helping newer teachers on board and talking about, my kids can do this. They do it all the time. And I didn't think they could. And it has changed how she taught. So I also think that sometimes it helps to have teachers at different places in the room and have teacher leaders who have experienced it and can share it. Because I actually feel like the new teachers would rather hear from that other teacher than from me. They want to hear from teachers who have experienced it and gone through it, and that can help shift beliefs as well.
Thank you so much. Y'all are so inspiring. I just want to come to all of your professional learning. Tracy, do you want to, you have some questions for the panel?
Yeah, we have a lot of great questions and a lot of great fans in the chat box. Kate and Kalanda, thanks so much for bringing your real experience and your own shifts to this. We're really appreciating it. So there's tons of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to sort of combine a couple here. You talked about student hat and how valuable that is. And there is a question about when you have folks in your learning context who come from different grade levels and different kinds of classrooms, how do you ensure that, how do you accommodate for that? Because folks want to experience what their own students are experiencing. So what are some adjustments you make for that? And this question is a little bit different, but it gets at the same thing. So you've got, sometimes you have singletons, and singletons, maybe you've only got one science teacher or something like that, and they're coming to a collaborative learning experience, or they don't have a chance to collaborate. So how do you ensure that your folks who are in different positions get the benefit of these great kinds of student immersive experiences? Kate, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, the way the curriculum-based PD is designed is it's designed for teachers that are going to enact that curriculum with their students. So when we're doing it, we have in the room middle school teachers, right? Because they're going to go off and be using that with their students. I think there's power in these general strategies linked to the concrete curriculum so teachers can see it in action. So we definitely have teachers with a variety of backgrounds in terms of science, in terms of other things. But when we're doing this PD, they're all going to go off and teach that curriculum. So they do have that commonality. And that's different than some other PD that I've run where I've had, first grade teachers and seventh grade teachers and 12th grade teachers when there's less commonality in terms of what they'll be doing with their students. So I find the curriculum as what they're going to go enact and use as a place to bring people together. I don't know, Kalanda, what do you think?
I 100% agree with that. I think there's power in us being able to work together. But I also think, and we do have sixth grade teachers all in one room together, seventh grade, eighth grade, et cetera. But I think the routine speaks for itself. So I think every district is a little different with funding and substitutes, right? So we don't want to ignore the reality of the experiences that we all have with those abilities, but our routine and our method. So I think our anchoring phenomena routine would support, Kate, if I'm correct, it would support all teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. You may not get that actual real-time experience with whatever phenomena that you're going to engage students with, but you're going to get the benefit of the process. So, and you're going to be able to go back and apply it in that way.
I agree.
Thanks, Kalanda. So something you mentioned, actually, there was a specific question about folks want to learn more about the anchoring phenomenon routine. Do you have a resource to share? Or if you do, pop it in the chat box. I think you sort of provoked some interest and questions there. So,
Kalanda, I can find the tracker, I think.
Okay. Perfect, thanks.
In the world of Google.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is we talked about this idea of equity, right? And this whole anchoring phenomena, engaging with the text or working out of math problems. But I think in terms of equity in affording students and the teacher the opportunity to start with a common experience, it's relevant, it's meaningful, right? So no matter where you come from, no matter what your experiences are, we take you through this routine, and maybe I don't have a lot to contribute because maybe I didn't grow up with lots of floods or droughts. But as we engage you through these experiences, we're making you think and we're working together. We've talked about it time and time again on the call. This approach is collaborative. So it's going to be a great routine to follow. And I think that's probably has gone in the chat box or it's on its way. Tracy?
that's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So hearing from the current challenges of leading a lot of this work through Zoom and other virtual kinds of platforms. And hearing from one of our peers in the science curriculum professional development space, teachers don't have as much time as we would hope they would for this kind of learning. And the question is, you know, we end up spending more time on the procedure of doing science lessons rather than learning about the shifts in instruction. So what are your thoughts on how to start to shift those habits and routines, and not only gain time, but also how you approach making that balance?
Kate, expert Kate.
I don't know about that, Kalanda.
Look, it takes time. Call for help. No, the reality is it does take time. But if we could shift teachers into thinking more from planning lessons, right, to helping students, and that you have to embrace the NGSS work. So you can't plan a lesson if you don't necessarily know that work. So I think that you may have to carve out some sort of time to maybe look at a curriculum, maybe look at the open science education or whatever your district is using, to kind of look at it in that form. But you got to think in terms of, in order to shift the mindsets of students, you cannot afford to not spend the time to become more well-versed in the NGSS shifts. If we're going to do benefits, you just got to make the time, right? And when you make the time, you're going to find that planning your lessons are going to be a lot more meaningful.
You know, when we did this PD earlier this week, one of the teachers said to me that if he had all the time in the world, this is exactly the curriculum he would want to be able to create, but he didn't have that time. So he loved that that resource was being given to him so he could focus on the relationships with the students and making sure that their voices were being heard, and he could build that. So I think another strength of having curriculum to use is it in some ways frees up other space for teachers to be able to do that relationship work and really get to know their students and elevate their students' ideas. Teaching is hard and it takes a ton of time, and teachers aren't given enough time. So there is also all the different levels of support, and having ideally, you know, the instructional leadership in the building or at the district level that's able to help teachers with that, because it takes time.
It does. It takes time. It takes a team. We have to work together. Like I said, I was joking, but reach out for help. We have to collaborate. And again, not just the lesson planning, but how can we create meaningful experiences? So if we can transition our thinking into creating those meaningful experiences, because you're going to find that kids are going to start really, they're going to help with your lessons. They're going to plan the lessons, right? You're going to have to go home and kind of figure out how to keep those experiences going. So reach out to someone, find someone. It doesn't have to be in your building. It could be in your district, or it could be the beauty of technology. Zoom and Microsoft Teams is being able to connect with other folks that are doing the work. You are not alone, and we need one another to make this happen.
Okay, I just have to say that was a perfect last answer between the two of you. Kate, that's really the power of high quality instructional materials, so that educators have time to dig deep on relationships, on going deep on the content in those lessons. And then Kalanda, the power of teams and doing this work collaboratively is just so critical. So Stephanie is going to share some takeaways as we wrap up.
Well, and one of the last things, I mean, there were so many questions, and I think all of us in today's session would be more than willing to continue to converse with anybody who has quite specific questions about this work. So if you want to put in the chat all of our emails now, Kate and Kalanda, would you be okay with that? Having emails shared if people have questions and want to follow up. So I'm all, and, or if you want to send it through me, then I can send it to the right person. Being I have fewer commitments these days than you all do, I'm glad to manage that. So within the report itself, there are several resources that can help you begin to answer the question about what do we do next. One of the pieces that people have appreciated is kind of how is this different? So we offer this particular chart here about some fundamental shifts. And I invite you to dig into the report. You're going to get the link at the very end. And to recognize that we're not saying stop doing anything, we're just shifting toward other things to improve the impact of our work. And there's a couple pages within the report that address what are the roles and responsibilities of the 3 target groups for the report. And we do it by the different sections of the elements. And so, for example, today we have a lot of professional learning providers and coaches in the room. And for the last 20 minutes, we've been looking at the functional elements and a couple things that we didn't have an opportunity to highlight, but are some next steps for you all to consider, is to maybe dig a little bit deeper into the research on how we do help individuals shift beliefs. What's the foundation for the great advice that was offered by Kate and Kalanda? And then we didn't have as much of a chance, even though Kalanda did say a little bit about the role of feedback and the role of coaching. But within the report and within the elements, there's guidance around certain change tools that can help you with this work, and around change management for curriculum implementation. Now, on the other hand, we have different set of recommendations for our system leaders and school leaders. And this is where, you know, I think your #1 responsibility is to make sure you have phenomenal designers, facilitators, and coaches, like the 2 people we were able to share the platform with today, that you make it a priority to invest in them and to make sure they have the foundational knowledge and experience and skill set necessary to engage all of their learners in great professional learning. And that you set up a process for monitoring and monitoring your progress, documenting your impact, and lastly, that as a school system, you recognize this doesn't happen in 1 year, and that you are thoughtful about your multi-year change management plan. Finally, within the report, we have a few other things and some additional resources for you. We have where you can go to get the report. We have this 2-page pullout that gives you the background and the definition of the elements. We have these individual pullouts on roles and responsibilities. We have videos like podcasts like the one you heard from Brian. And we have case studies of districts that we held up as examples of exemplifying certain elements within the report. So we hope you dig in. We hope it's helpful. Most importantly, we hope it's helpful to your work. And we wish you great success in implementing curriculum-based professional learning.
Stephanie, thank you so much. And Jim, we really appreciate the work that the Carnegie Corporation is putting out there. It's so helpful to all of us. And you brought us a great pair of educators from the field to learn about this. So thanks so much for this. And I just want to remind folks that we'll have another webinar on Thursday, February 11th, Culturally Responsive Instruction in an Online World. You can sign up for that. And then February 25th, Assessing Student Work Online, really looking at formative assessment and how we monitor how students are learning. So I want to thank all our attendees again today. Thanks for coming, learning with us, and for coming to all of our webinars. And we hope you all have a great end of the week. We'll talk to you soon.